Welcome to The Real News. I'm Eddie Conway, coming to you from Baltimore. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Rattling the Bars. You know, there's been a lot of attention on the coronavirus and a lot of attention on the economy, suggestions that everybody shelter in place is sweeping across the country. There's been little or no attention on something that could prove to be a humanitarian disaster. That is the 2.3 million people held in prisons and jails across America. It's clear that they just very, in most cases, feet apart. In dormitory situations, there might be as close as 2 feet, and there might be 100 or 200 people held in those dormitories. If the virus gets out in the prison systems, it's gonna impact a lot of people. Probably a good proportion of prisoners now in America, because of the craziness of the lengthy sentences, senior citizens. They had respiratory and other immune compromising diseases. So this would definitely be devastating, and it would be close, and this is just my opinion as one person that's been in prison for a number of decades, it would be close to the genocide that was practiced in Germany against the Jewish population and other populations of color and so on. It's clear that 75% of the prison population in the United States of America are people of color. So there's been calls across the country about the release of some of these aging and elderly and perhaps infirm prisoners. So joining me today to talk about that and to talk about the conditions in the ICE facilities also, a number of people. First, Sonia Kumar is from the ACLU, and she's going to talk about what's happening in Maryland. And Hallie Gold is from Never Again Action, and Jorge Torres is from Ice Free New Jersey. So thank you, Sonia, Hallie, Jorge, for joining me. I'd like to start with Sonia, and tell me about the letter that the ACLU have written to the governor, and what's in it, and what do you expect?
Thank you, Eddie, for raising this important issue. So as everyone knows, sort of public officials around the country, soon after we learned of the virus, began taking steps to educate all of us about what we need to do to keep us all safe and to minimize the spread of the virus. One of the places, as you noted, Eddie, where there has been a sort of deafening silence is in relation to our prisons and jails. And so, you know, for example, at the beginning of March, Governor Hogan in Maryland began issuing executive orders and making various statements about what Marylanders needed to do. As of this date, there has been no public action relating to our prisons and jails or our criminal legal system generally, or public guidance even, other than an announcement on March 12th that they were going to suspend visits in the prisons indefinitely, or for 2 weeks, I believe, at that time. So last week, the ACLU sort of coordinated, but we did a letter on behalf of a number of more than a dozen organizations. I think at this point we have more than 300 signatories, urging the governor to sort of treat this crisis with the same attention that that we've seen in other contexts, like in the business context, for example. And what we were urging the governor to do is to, first reject baseless claims that have been circulating that somehow people could be safer in our prisons and jails than in the community. That was number one. We're hearing that there are prosecutors making those claims. The governor himself repeated that claim at a press conference. And then second, we urged him to take swift steps to make clear to all of the stakeholders of the criminal legal system that the status quo can't be allowed to continue. And so there were three primary areas of focus. One was doing everything possible to limit new admissions to our prisons and jails. And that involves coordinating among law enforcement as well as prosecutors and judges. A second was looking for ways to expedite the release of people who can safely return to our communities from our prisons and jails. As you know, Eddie, we have tens of thousands of people in Maryland who are incarcerated in our prisons and jails, many of whom could safely return, as well as many of whom are elderly, many of whom have medical issues. And it's important that we decrease the population density in our prisons and jails as quickly as possible. And then finally, for those who remain in the prisons and jails, we urge the governor to take swift steps to ensure that we're doing everything possible to maintain their safety in terms of identifying people who are most vulnerable to serious risk of harm if they contract the virus, as well as really doing everything possible to empower people inside to take steps to protect themselves and to help in managing this crisis.
Okay, let's look at New Jersey for a minute. Jorge, the ICE-free New Jersey has organized an action outside of the detention center. You want to bring us up to date on what happened and what's happening?
So what's going on is that couple days ago, we had heard from a lot of the inmates inside that they were very worried about how people that was detained on the border was transferring to detention centers, and also people that was detained in New York City, which is the epicenter of this pandemic, has been transferred to Essex and Hudson County Detention Center as well. So, it was very, we were very concerned about inmates. We work closely with First Friends, which is an organization that do a lot of jail visits. And then what we were hearing was that in Hudson County Detention Center, they couldn't even have soap. They were not getting hand sanitizers or anything like that to disinfect themselves, or to prevent to this pandemic to be a spread in among the other inmates as well. So we were very worried about these cases, and then we just decided that it was important to inmates to start getting together and to start organizing. So they put together a hunger strike in the Essex Detention Center. Then Cosecha Never Again and ICE-free New Jersey organized the first rally outside of the Essex Detention Center. And then on Sunday, we got contact from some other groups as well. And then we organized, together with other organizations outside of the rally in the cars outside of the Hudson Detention Center, just to support that it was another hunger strike that the inmates start. And now is another one in Elizabeth Detention Center too. The inhumane part of it is that everything is closed and not the detention center. I mean, we're demanding that the Governor Murphy should use his executive power to close the detention centers and to release inmates from the ICE detention centers.
Hallie, you joined in this action. Tell me a little bit about why your group came out and what you expect to happen as a result of this.
it was super important to support this action and really put capacity into this action because, you know, any detention center is at serious risk for everybody inside getting coronavirus and it's, you know, only a matter of time before these detention centers become death camps with everybody trapped inside because of course, you know, you can't you can't socially distance inside a prison. It's not possible. And so, yeah, it was hugely important for Never Again to demand the release of everybody in detention at this moment. And one of the things that we had been encouraging our public to do as well in taking a lot of different, you know, distributed actions across the country in all different detention centers across the country, we, you know, reminded people too that like people like Anne Frank, victims of the Holocaust, she didn't actually die in a gas chamber. She died of typhus, which was a disease caught in a concentration camp. And so we wanted to remind our greater public of that and encourage them to realize that this is an issue that they should care about too. So yeah, it's been super important for us to really bring in what we could and turn out as many cars as possible in order to make the actions effective and make sure that everybody can get released now, yesterday, as soon as possible.
Jorge, there was an announcement yesterday that 1,000 prisoners in New Jersey was going to be released, but I didn't get the impression that it had anything to do with the ICE detention centers. Are you following that? Can you give us some insight on who those prisoners were and how that relates to your action on the ground?
I mean, I think what the administration, and yes, I mean, they're going to be released, they're going to release 1,000 inmates, but it's more for the side of the criminal justice side of it. And it's people that has been sick, people that has been, you know, very high, you know, pretend to get the virus. So it's like 1,000 inmates. I think it's the right thing to do. I think in this time, it is also a lot of people from you know, people that has been detained from ICE. So it is no one that is moving, no fingers to release them. It is a lot of people sick inside as well that could get the virus. So we definitely wanted to keep pushing for that.
Sonia, I see that the ACLU was part of that campaign to get those prisoners released in New Jersey. Is this something that ACLU is trying to do across the country? Can you talk a little bit about that? Are you aware of it?
Yes. So I think, as all of us are saying, there's a recognition that in this time of crisis, we have to do everything possible to get as many people out of harm's way as we can. And so, and every state, of course, is different, but we share these common concerns. And so there is, I think, very much a movement of which the ACLU is part to try every strategy possible to get people out. And so I think one of the, you know, the ACLU in New Jersey, along with my understanding is their public defender's office, did a lot of work to kind of help elevate the issues in the courts to get to the decision makers who actually had the authority to let people out. The governor of Wisconsin recently ordered that state's prison system to limit prison admissions to the degree possible. There are a huge number, I think, of local actions also happening. We've been talking at the state level, but also local actions happening in terms of local corrections officials, local prosecutors, to try to stem the tide. Right here in Maryland, the state's attorney of Baltimore City and the state's attorney of Prince George's County have really helped elevate those concerns as well.
Okay, so has there been any prisoners released in Maryland? And if not, what action does the public need to take to help facilitate that?
So in Maryland, our understanding is that there have been people who have avoided pretrial detention as a result of the attempts to mitigate harm by new admissions to the jails. But we're not aware of anyone who's been released from the DOC as a result of the virus. I think, number one is making clear as members of the public that we recognize that this is a crisis. It's a matter of when, not if, and that we really care about. We see the connection between what happens in our prisons and jails and what is happening in the outside world. And so I think, number one is making sure that the governor feels that sense of urgency and appreciates that is something that folks care about. And I think in the same way, just continuing to do the education and the various kinds of actions that we can all take in our respective capacities. Okay, and I don't want to kind of like just narrow this down, but is there legal action that can be taken? Because this seems to be a liberty interest in terms of someone goes into prison, they receive 10 years, they're in there during this pandemic, they lose their life. Is there a liberty interest, a legal action that can be taken on behalf of at least prisoners that are at risk, over 60, et cetera, et cetera? Is there anything that can be done legally? I think that's a question we're all trying to answer. I think, as you know, courts have traditionally been very hostile to efforts to address the crisis in prisons and jails before the pandemic, including releasing people from those cruel conditions. That is certainly something that I think lawyers and advocates across the country are exploring. I think every system is going to be a little bit different in terms of what is possible. That's the most I can say right now. Okay, Hallie, since it's clear that the hunger strikes are growing in New Jersey, it's also clear that there's a case, not a case, but a dozen cases or more in Rikers Island, and that's probably going to increase as days go by. What can people on the ground do besides, the protest is good, the motorcades, that kind of stuff. What else needs to happen?
Honestly, I think in this period of time, we're just kind of seeing the beginning of some different creative action tactics that are COVID safe. So I think continued sustained targeted action will continue, hopefully, to move people in time. I know one thing, there's a Never Again group in New York City, and they're in the process of planning particular targeted actions. I'm not honestly clear on what. I think they're working on deciding what their tactics are going to be, but there have been other actions in light of COVID that are COVID safe, but that have been things like projection, like in New York City, there was a projection on the immigration courthouse demanding that people be released, both in immigration detention and in places like Rikers. Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of people, because we're kind of in the middle of going through this. We're just seeing kind of the beginnings of different possible tactics that people can use that are less harmful than like marching together close by, which is not something we are unfortunately able to do as much with the coronavirus spreading so quickly. But yeah, basically, yeah, the long and short of it is that like lots of people on the ground in lots of different places, including New Jersey, New York City. There were actions in California too, targeting their governor as well. People are coming up with all different types of ways to do targeted direct action in a different way that they have before.
Jorge,
Can I?
you get the final question, and the question is, what from where you sit, what do you think people can do that can be safe but most helpful to put pressure and bring attention to the conditions in these detention centers and prisoners in the jails?
I think that it's about time to get unified. I think it's about time for the criminal justice advocacies and also the immigration and ICE detention, abolishing advocacies to get together. This is not about if you are detaining in ICE or if you are detaining on the criminal justice system. I feel that this is about being a human beings. This is about putting profit over families. And people are just getting angry and I know and I believe that this will be escalating, and it will be escalation on actions if we don't get what it is to be right to do as a moral and humanity way to do it. I feel that this is about saving lives. This is not about just saving peoples that are in one side of it is another side. I think it's about being human and also, we totally believe in that this coronavirus is just about getting the rich people and people of color, put it as ourselves in one side of another side. This is not about and this is not about your color, the color of your skin. This is about being human and doing the correct things to do. And I mean, what other people can do is, I mean, join all these actions. That is always a risk. But if we talk about risk, undocumented people is always being in a risk. People that is in detention centers, people of color is being a risk. So, this risk of being in your car and then just go and beep outside of the detention center is not, too much. So I feel like it is time to get together. I think it is time to send a correct message. It is time for people that does policy, for people that do, direct actions. I think it's about to send in as collective message that we could to achieve this goal, which is something that is just humane and stop putting profit over families.
Thank you for joining me, Sonia, Hallie, Jorge.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation, and let's keep doing this kind of programs.
And we will. And thank you for joining this episode of Rattling the Bars for the Real News.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.